Well, I'm back. My internet decided to glitch out on me there for a second. So right in the middle of talking about attacks and threat actors. So as I was saying, I'll finish up real quickly. The casino got robbed through an aquarium remote equipment, and so we're facing these kind of unique challenges of newer and newer devices, that could come on. So who are they? Threat actors. Well, technically, in the broadest sense, a threat actor is anyone who could take advantage of a potential vulnerability to, cause problems, right? But we break them up into a number of different categories. Script kiddies are how we generally refer to the more amateur folks. I joke every year that a new crop is born at Christmas time when kids get their first computer. A certain percentage will run off instantly to start downloading various tools and begin attacking. They may be their friend's Minecraft server, but it also is the beginning of them heading down the roads to becoming a hacker. Some of them will, see the light, if you will, and use their powers for good and join a program like ours or become, a white hat. But some of them will head down the road to being our adversaries. And so we have the script kiddies. And then as people, progress up into that, become less of amateur, less of a hobbyist, and start to become professional in one way or the other, then that's usually what it comes down to. I mean, years ago in the innocent days, I shouldn't say a lot, but a chunk of hacking was about fame, showing off that you could do something, just trying to find out that hacking has actually had a whole full circle of hacking was a good term in the early days. There's a book called Hackers, the Heroes of the Digital Revolution that refers back to the early days and how people hacking or making systems better, pushing them further, figuring out what they could do, learning these new devices called computers and networks. But of course, then hacking went dark when we started getting all the spam we get, all the phishing attacks, all the malware, and people trying to make money and encrypt your hard drive, and just on and on. And so we have our black hat hackers, our enemy hackers. And when you move beyond being an amateur in that side, your first step is some form of being a criminal. Generally speaking, today, the prime motivator is money in one form or another. And so then you head down the road of, being a attacker. Maybe you're trying to scam people, sell them fake goods, or steal their information. And of course, then some of these people get together and form criminal gangs. And there are some very elaborate ones in different parts of the world. And then, of course, as you continue to move up the chain to the more highly resourced and skilled players, we start to run into nations today. Some directly and some indirectly affiliated to try to, and do it for corporate reasons too. A lot of countries are very much trying to steal corporate data countries in the world and the more advanced companies so that they can feed that information into their own manufacturers. So so that is, the big, and then we talk a little bit about, of course, we can't forget about social engineering, which has been around as long as there's been attacks too. Social engineering is just the idea of manipulating people. And so it's been happening. People have been social engineered before there were networks. It's just like Trojan, in a sense, Trojan horse predated the malware version of it in the modern world, but the concepts are the same, right? So then as we move on and try to get through the last couple here, and hopefully internet will stay stable for me here. I've actually switched to my hotspot to finish this session. I'm going to go check on my main network in a second. Lesson 4 is on information security. And what we're looking at there is it's some concepts of, as I said, what are we trying to do in the beginning? What does that first chapter tell us? We're trying to protect the information of an organization and all the stuff that goes around it to, that we use, the computer, the network, etc. So there's a couple really interesting and key concepts in this lesson. One is there's a picture, a graphic that sort of kind of like an onion. There's different layers as we go out. And in the very heart of that is that information we're trying to protect. And then a layer out of that is a bunch of products. Okay, well, that's like the equipment, right? That's our firewall, intrusion detection, our servers, our software, etc. Then we have people, and the people use these products, right? They run the computers, they manage the firewall, etc. And then we have all these policies and procedures. And so that is the information security model, that we are building layers of defenses by different types of things. And they all work together, the three P's, if you will, of products and people and policies. Because the products, well, I could probably going to work better the other way, but the policies that we've designed tell the people how to use the products, right? So, like, think about it. If you go to work for some place, you're probably going to have to sign a couple things as part of coming on board. An acceptable use policy, where the company has stated in policy form what you can and can't do with their stuff. You can use your personal email or you can't. You can surf at Facebook at lunch or you can't. Personal acceptable use of the equipment. You have maybe a password policy that tells everybody, 8 characters change once in a blue moon to 40,000 characters changed every 2 seconds. But okay, not that extreme, but you get the point. There'll be a password policy. If you go into work in IT, there'll be all kinds of security policies and policies on how you configure a base server, how you configure a client for a new employee, how you configure the firewall. And so we see that these procedures guide the people into using the products to help protect that underlying information. And then there's another really interesting model in that chapter as well, and that is on the 7 domains of a typical IT structure. This is another one of these conceptual models. Like I said, a lot of this lesson is about sort of filling your head full of concepts and principles that you can file away and then use them as you get into later in the course, as well as obviously in your career. And so this idea of this 7 domains, you start thinking about it, okay, we understand now that we're trying to protect all the information and thus all of the equipment that touches, manipulates, massages that information. We got to train and put policies in place and etc. to help our people use that equipment, and all of that has to be in a sort of an overall security framework so that we can be on top of everything. But how do we begin making one of these security frameworks? Well, the not the one that's the next class, the 7 domains model, sorry, wrong model. 7 domains model is a way of conceptually breaking up a typical corporate IT structure, infrastructure, into these different areas. So we have the user domain, and this is about the people. And we have the workstation domain. This is the devices the users use to connect and use the resources of the entire network. This could be, years ago, it was mainly desktops, but now it could be laptops, tablets, rugged devices, phones, all kinds of stuff, right? So we have to deal with their, with their needs. And then, of course, we have our network, our LAN, we have connections to the outside world, our WAN, we have our own dedicated servers inside, we have remote access. And what you see by breaking the entire, you can lay this on top of any organization, in that then you can decide, okay, well, now we're going to look at, when it comes to a certain segment, the LAN, for example, that's the network. So there's certain things that we need to do to secure that network. We need to use good protocols. We need to have some equipment that's all about protecting and monitoring the network. Indirectly, the users and thus the workstations who are using the network are going to use that, but you don't have to think about that. We're not going to put in intrusion detection software on a user, if you see what I mean. We might put it on a workstation, but less likely. We might do some host-based intrusion on a server, but the idea is that each area has sort of common needs. We need to protect the network, so we're going to use firewalls, intrusion detection, and certain things. We need to, and then some areas do have overlap. Obviously, LAN to WAN, we probably have some of the same things, but then you may have some different equipment, like some of our we ultimately lead into those servers and things that we have exposed on the internet, and how we're going to have to protect them. And so this allows us to sort of break it up conceptually and divide and conquer. We're not having to start from scratch when we go to create an organizational security policy. We can divide things up. And the reality is, as I'm going to show you and tell you next week, we don't have to start from scratch at all, thankfully. Because one, most places you go to work, they already will have started this effort. But let's just say, hypothetically, you go work for some place or you start your own business, right? And you grow to a point where it's like, okay, we need to put our organizational security policy in place. We need to document this. We're growing, we're hiring people. We don't need to do this by the seat of our pants. It's not just the 3 of us in a garage anymore. We're forming a company. We have an office. So we need to formalize this. What do we do? And as you're going to learn, there are numerous, they're basically like templates in a sense. If you were going to, write a resume for the first time, you wouldn't just start writing from scratch. You'd probably look at some other examples. And so we can look at some other examples, guidelines, templates, and things. And that's another way. But then still, this model of the 7 domains allows us to break it up and look at what we need to do in each of those areas of our organization. In between some of these conceptual models and the templates we'll see next week, now we have the framework for which we can build an organization security policy. So before we get to that, though, we have to cover a few really important concepts. And so in lesson 5, we begin to expose you to some of these. And then in lesson 6, when we come back next week, we'll talk about a few other really important concepts. But this first lesson 5, we call it Defense Basics. And really, I mean, this could be defense basic in any concept, but in our case, cybersecurity. But as you're going to see, we're going to draw analogies to other things, because what we're looking at, and the most important sort of conceptual defense concept that you're going to want to carry with you for the rest of your career and the rest of your life. And it can apply to other areas than just here. And it can apply to all kinds of areas, strategically and tactically within cybersecurity, is the concept of layered defenses, or defense in depth. This is something that comes effectively right out of the military. The idea if you want to slow your attacker down and have multiple layers of defense, so that as they're attempting, to get to your core, if you will, your home world, your home planet, your home country, your capital, whatever, the king, then you've got multiple layers. The best example that I always like to use, because I'm a bit of a gaming geek and run fair kind of D&D kind of playing person most of my life, is a castle. A castle is the epitome of defense in depth. If you think about a castle, if you've ever seen one, visited one, toured one, there's a few in the country in the United States, but other parts of the world have lots of them, particularly Europe, of course, but other places where they've been maintained and where people can tour them. Some people still own them in certain parts of the world. But nonetheless, if you have been to a real castle at some point, or just seen them on television, seen them in a movie, seen them whatever, usually the first thing that, and maybe you didn't notice this, but maybe you pay attention now, is that the first line of defense is that the castle can see you from a long way away. If you think about it, many times castles are up on a hill, so they have this tactical advantage of being able to look a long way away and see the enemy coming. That's one line of defense. If it's really in a flat territory, you'll usually see that a castle has had the land around it completely clear cut for a long way. Once again, so that if that army comes marching out of those woods, we'll see them a ways away, and we can close the gate, pull up the drawbridge, do what we got to do. And then those are the other layers, right? Usually there's a moat of burning oil, or crocodile piranha filled water, or sea dragon, or whatever it is, depending upon the story. There's a bridge, a drawbridge that you can pull up. There's gates and portcullises. Then there's all of these walls, these huge first layer of defense walls. Really, they're the third, maybe third or fourth layer in now, right? And so then there's arrow holes to shoot out and throw oil down. But if you look at the design of most castles, inside there's usually other walls. And there may be 2 or 3 other layers, complete subwalls all the way down to an inner citadel, so that once again they can continue to retreat back. Even if the outer wall is breached, they can continue to defend against the siege and potentially survive the encounter. So layers of defenses, or defense in depth, it's just huge. If there's a reason to defend, then there's a reason to use this concept. So if we're defending a network, we're going to want to make sure we don't just say, we have to throw up a firewall and we're done, we're protected. No, people will come around that. We'll talk about that. So we're going to want layers of defense. We're going to want different types of things that we're doing in addition. And this can apply to even tactically, instead of network, whole strategic wise, yes, we're going to use layered defenses. And as you saw back in lesson 3, informational, there's a layered defense model already there, right? We have the information protected by products, protected by people, protected by our policies. But we're going to want to add more depth to that at all those layers, actually. We're going to have multiple types of things that we're using in the product level, different people, admins and security people working together, policies that are helping work together, and these layers of defenses. But just within our network, we're going to have our firewall, possibly, login mechanisms, encryption, security, intrusion detection. It's all this stuff we're going to cover throughout this program. And that gives us that defense in depth. And then we're going to do that even at a lower level. We're going to set up a brand new server. Well, how do we want to defend it? We're not just going to throw it up there on the net. We're going to lock it down. We're going to defend it. We may put some additional, like a web application firewall just on that web server. There's different things that we can do to respond and provide defense in depth, both tactically as well as strategically. So hugely important concept that you will continue to use. Most people get it. It's pretty straightforward. The castle analogy is enough for most folks. And maybe you have your own. I mean, you think of a military base in the modern world today, the same deal. There'll be people out defending at checkpoints. As you come in closer, there's an interior wall, a perimeter fence, and other layers of defense. Other types of things, from machine gun nests to people walking the guard duty to dogs to cameras, all this. And we were going to adopt some of that same type of strategy to protect our informational assets. Now, there are a couple last things that I'm going to wrap up on in lesson 5, which are related to defense in depth and related to that idea of having that, that you don't want to end up doing all that, have a great system. You got all the layers of defense, multiple pieces of equipment, multiple types of things protecting your network, and then you leave the same people in the same roles for months, years on end, and one of them becomes the problem, or one of them becomes compromised. And so the idea, the last 2 concepts, is the idea of what we call separation of duties. You don't want to put all your eggs in one basket in personnel either. So you don't want one super admin who has all the keys to the kingdom, because if they go bad or are compromised, then of course, so does now your attacker have all the keys to the kingdom. And if they're just go rogue, or they finally leave mad, you didn't give them that promotion or raise, and they drop a logic bomb on your computer on the way out and blow everything up, and delete all your files, then that's a problem, right? So ideally you want to separate the duties. And so of course, if you're a smaller company, that's harder, but you still got to keep it in mind. As you get larger, then you definitely want to have, somebody's running the web server, somebody's running the firewall, somebody's running this. And then of course, as you get a certain size, you'll have system admin, sort of IT people who do a lot of stuff, with some security people whose jobs are to kind of oversee that that's being configured, and to come back in and check it and scan it and do other things as well. And then the other thing is called rotation of duties, because even then you got half a dozen people managing your network. That's a half a dozen weak spots. And if Sally's been running the mail server forever, and she's got her backdoor Trojan account for whenever she leaves, so she can spam and reach everybody in the company and do whatever she wants to do or say whatever she wants to say. If you rotate those duties, and so Bill takes over that mail server, he may clean, it's his old account, I don't know, maybe he won't catch Sally, but he'll at least stop her access, or maybe he will catch her, right? And so these are all related concepts. When we come back next week, we will talk about the last 5 lessons. Hopefully we won't have a break in the middle of it, so it won't be a 2-part recording. Sorry about that. And so we will cover some more defense concepts, further defense concepts next week. We'll talk in depth about these frameworks that we can use to begin to lay out the outlines of our security policy. And then we will look at some additional information on threat actors, particularly some more detail on their attributes, as well as introduce the concept of non-human threat actors. And then we'll kind of start to bring some of this together and look at some additional pieces under the concept of organizational security. And then if there's time, I'll talk briefly, a little bit of transition for you folks as you head into that Network Foundations class, get you a little leg up maybe on some of the technology conceptually, so that when you get there, it won't be quite as a shock if you've never done that before. That's going to be the end for today. This will be a 2-parter when I post it later, but I have a few more video lecture workshops to do, some demos to do today for other classes. So once they're all done, I'll get these downloaded, posted, processed, and I'll post the links in the LMS. Look forward to seeing you next week if you can make it. And if not, of course, look me up on Slack or drop me an email. Thanks so much.